Today we are reading out of Hebrews, and our passage today talks a lot about God's grace and the effect of grace in our lives, what grace means for us. Paul talks about grace in Ephesians chapter 2. And I just really want to sit today with the idea of grace and the concept of grace. Because I have sneaking suspicion that it's one of those words that we use so often in church communities and in secular circles too, right? I mean, we talk about grace in church settings, certainly, but we also use it in secular context when we talk about somebody handling a situation with grace or showing somebody else grace or being gracious. I think it's maybe one of those words that we use so often that we kind of lose the depth of its meaning. And so what does grace mean? And especially, what does it mean in a biblical context? Stretching back all the way through the biblical storyline throughout the Old Testament and the New, grace is this idea of bestowing favor, of giving a gift, of giving blessing, of being generous to somebody. In the Old Testament, I think favor is probably the closest word, giving gift of favor is grace. And this might not be obvious to all of us. Grace, for most cultures, and in most other aspects of our society, grace and favor are given to people who deserve it, right? Favor is given to somebody who has earned it, who has merited it, who has done a good job. We give blessings to people who earn them. And so actually the concept of a God who gives unmerited gifts and unmerited favor to people who don't deserve it is a really radical concept. The idea of unmerited favor is so rare. It's so rare. And that is exactly what Paul is talking about in Ephesians chapter 2. He says, we were dead in our sin. We were not deserving of God's favor, right? And he says in verse 8, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. You didn't merit it. You couldn't if you tried. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." Here's what I would like to say today. I think that there are two wrong responses that we can have to the concept of grace on two ends of the spectrum. The first end of the spectrum is those of us who get into a very legalistic mindset. We're very hard on ourselves, and we get in this state of mind where we are still working to achieve and earn and merit something that has already been given to us for free, right? There are no preconditions for grace. But some of us get caught in this hamster wheel of trying to earn what has already been given to us, and God doesn't want that. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where we kind of live by the motto, ask for forgiveness, not permission, right? Where grace is kind of a blank check that if I don't like what God says about some aspect of my life, I'm going to do it my way and ask for him to give me grace and forgiveness later. I think both of those responses are the wrong understanding of what grace means for us and a wrong response to the gift that we receive from God. So what is the right one? I think if you read Ephesians 2 verses 8 through 10 again, you will see this interesting thing. Paul says you were not saved by your works. You couldn't earn it on this side of the spectrum. Not if you tried. But you were saved for works, right? He says we were created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared for us to do. You were not saved by your works, but you were saved for good works. When God gave us this gift, there were no conditions on grace, but the gift was given to you with the hope that you would return relationship and trust and obedience. That in response to this gift, you would give him your life and your allegiance. I think we cheapen grace when we act like it doesn't do what God promises it will do, and so we need to earn it. Or we cheapen it when we say, actually, it's just a Band-Aid for everything I decide to do. There's somebody who talks about this, I think, far better than I ever could. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote this book, Cost of Discipleship. If you've never read it, you really should. I was introduced to this book when I was 17 in my high school Bible class, and it was dense for a 17-year-old. But there are quotes from this book that have stuck with me ever since. And the way that Bonhoeffer writes about grace nearly moves me to tears every time I write about it, because he reminds me of the cost and the richness and the weight of grace. I just want to read you a little bit of what he says. Grace is costly because it calls us to follow, and it is grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It is costly because it costs a man his life, and it is grace because it gives a man the only true life. It is costly because it condemns sin, and grace because it justifies the sinner. Above all, it is costly because it cost God the life of his Son, and what has cost God much cannot be cheap for us. Above all, it is grace because God did not reckon his Son too dear a price to pay for our life, but delivered him up for us. Costly grace is the incarnation of God. You are not saved by your works. You are saved by grace through faith. But grace is costly, and it comes with a call to give up everything we are and everything we have, to follow in obedience and to do good works for the one who gave us the gift, the one who counted his Son not too high a price for your and my life. It's costly, but in response to a God like that, who gives such an extravagant, unfathomable gift, how could I not? How could we not? So today, what is your response to a God who did not count his Son too high a price to pay for your life, and then asks that you give him yours, to place your trust in him, to be in relationship with him, and to walk in his ways as a response? Take care, friends.